The following is a presentation from Creation Today Ministries and is made possible by the faithful support from our creation partners. To them, we say thank you. To learn how you can become a Creation Today partner, visit us at creationtoday.org.
The question we have tonight is it warming up or is it cooling down? Climate change of the 1970s was global cooling. Then in the late 80s to 90s to 2000s, it was global warming. Now it's climate change. It's going to be an interesting conversation that we have. My guest is Dr. Jake Hebert, and Dr. Hebert is with the Institute for Creation Research, and they are really a phenomenal, a leading, they're the grandfather of the creation movement. They're the ones that have been around forever, started by Dr. Henry Morris, really wanting to say, hey, here when we have a bunch of people claiming to accept science but reject the Bible, doesn't science confirm the Bible? And begin to research this. And I'm blown away at what their organization has done over the years to educate and equip people and actually do the science. So Dr. Hebert is a scientist and a researcher, and he does have an expertise in this subject of climate change. What's the truth? And that's what you're going to get tonight. Dr. Hebert, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate this.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Eric.
I have loved learning from you, the work that you've done. You've got a new book coming out that I want to read, that I'm ready to get my hands on. And can you give us, though, real quick, a background of why you got to be the Institute for Creation Research climate change expert?
Well, I've always, it actually started out because I was interested in the pre-flood climate. I'll admit that I was a big fan of the vapor canopy for a long time.
Me too.
But now I got to admit, I don't think that's correct anymore, but that's what initially attracted me to that area. And so in graduate school, I thought, maybe I should I had an opportunity to do something that was somewhat climate meteorology related. And I signed up for it. And I didn't realize it right away, but it turned out that my advisor was doing some really cutting edge research. I think he may have figured out something that people have been wondering about for hundreds of years. What's the true connection between solar activity, cosmic rays, and weather and climate? And he's got at least a big part of the answer, I think. And I was able to help him move the football a few more yards down the field with my research. So I sort of just kind of went with that and started doing some ice age stuff because, especially with the ice cores, a lot of people mistakenly think are an unanswerable argument for an old Earth. And so I wanted to see what can I do to, shoot down those arguments. And so I got into studying the evidence for the Milankovitch ice age theory, which is the secular ice age theory. I found some interesting stuff there. It's a lot shakier than what a lot of people think. And that turns out to be one of the main arguments for climate alarmism.
Wow. So the whole trilogy of the Ice Age movies and the cartoons is all based on something that's a little shaky.
Well, there was an ice age. There was an ice age, but we think there was just one, and it was caused by the Genesis flood. But they claim that there have been multiple ice ages throughout history. Now, the thing is, the evidence for these other ice ages is very weak, and you can't expect there to be strong geological evidence for them, even if they had happened, because if you had multiple ice ages, then each time you have a new ice age, the ice sheets are going to bulldoze the previous geological evidence for the other ice age. So even they would admit that the evidence is really only strong for the most recent ice age. But the main argument they have for multiple ice ages is actually coming from the seafloor sediments and the way they interpret chemical wiggles in them. And so what I did was I went back to this very important 1976 paper that people quote all the time called The Pacemaker of the Ice Ages. And I found out after I did some digging that when they did their calculations that supposedly confirmed the Milankovitch theory, they were using an age assignment that they themselves no longer accept as valid. And I thought, hey, I wonder what would happen if we were to go back and redo the calculations after taking that into account. And so I did it, and sure enough, it messes up the results. And I also more recently came across some evidence. I think some of the secular scientists knew about this because it looked around 1997. It looked like there was this frantic attempt to try to prop up the Milankovitch theory so that they could still claim it was valid. And my suspicions are that I think somebody pointed out this problem to them. And so that's something I've worked on. I've also spent a lot of time just trying to explain to people why the ice cores don't prove an old Earth. I've done quite a bit of that, and I'm actually now working on trying to extend Larry Vardaman's work on the ice cores to see if we can come up with some better young Earth models for the ice cores. And so I'm working very hard on that right now.
This is exciting to get to talk to somebody who's on the cutting edge of doing this research and literally getting into the data, digging in and going, okay, what is all this? What are all these what are the real true facts? Actually, how should they be interpreted? And that's what I want to get into tonight is some of the real facts behind it. But to start to back up, let's get the big picture of the whole. We know that I had people on Facebook when I put this on Facebook. They said, I was alive in the 70s and I was taught that in school because I put up a newspaper clipping that said global cooling, we're all in danger. And then literally 20 years later, they're putting up articles saying global warming, we're all in danger.
Right. Well, it's true. That now they will try to the ones on the other side who are alarmists will try to deny that they were claiming that, but there's too much historical evidence. They were saying that. And by the way, you know why they were saying it? Because of the Milankovitch theory. Because according to the Milankovitch theory, you have these periodic ice ages. So we were about due for another ice age. And so now they're claiming, the global warming postponed the ice age, which to me sounds like a good thing.
Seriously, we fixed it.
Secular ice age models, their ice ages are really bitterly cold. I mean, I would think that you would want things to be a little bit warmer. So, but yeah, it's there's a lot of inconsistency there. And one point that I'm very keen on making is that I think you can trace virtually all climate alarmism to a denial of Scripture. Not all evolution. Let me say this. Make sure I say it right. Not all evolutionists are climate alarmists. But pretty much all climate alarmists are evolutionists. Okay, even the ones who are Christians. Okay, they accept deep time. They accept the typical interpretation of the chemical wiggles and the seafloor sediments and ice cores, and that is contributing to the alarmism in several ways.
Okay, so that's interesting. So I feel like we just got to one of our conclusions. That's a powerful statement to say that. Look, if tell me that statement again, the one you said right before that. It was if you don't understand, if you don't take the Bible literally, that's what leads you to these conclusions.
Yes, if what I am trying to show people is that if you don't take Genesis seriously, you're going to get a bunch of stuff wrong.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah.
We got to get into this because that's really good stuff. And then I still got questions beyond that because I want to ask you later on, we'll cover climate change. And then I want to go, okay, does Revelation 11:18, which says, God's going to destroy those who destroy the earth. Is that what this is talking about? In 2 Peter 3:10, the heavens are going to melt with a fervent heat. Is that global warming is going to happen on it? So I want to try to get to all that and answer all that. But okay, I guess you probably know where beginners need to start when it comes to the climate change ideas and is it changing, and then get into the actual evidence. Take us on this journey. Show us.
All right, experts on both sides of this issue. And by the way, I want to make it clear, I'm not a climatologist or meteorologist per se, but I've done research that's relevant to that. Okay, I'm learning as I go.
More than 30 minutes on Google, right?
Yeah, more than 30 minutes on Google. Yeah,
you got some years invested into this.
Yeah, I have. I've spent quite a bit of time on this. But here's what experts on both sides of the issue will tell you. The heart of the debate is something called equilibrium climate sensitivity. Okay. Nobody disputes that if you were to double the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, there's going to be a slight temperature increase. Okay, because it's a greenhouse gas. It's going to warm things up a little bit. The question is, what happens after that? Okay, because the climate system is very complicated, and if you change one thing, other things change too. Okay, and you can imagine that there are these feedbacks that could either amplify the warming or could impede the warming, could act against the warming. Okay, so those who are concerned about climate change or global warming, they think climate sensitive, particularly what they call equilibrium climate sensitivity, is high. They think that after you double the amount of carbon dioxide, eventually, when after everything settles down, and this could take hundreds of years, maybe even longer, the surface temperature is going to go up a bunch. Okay, that's what they think. On the other hand, those who aren't worried about it or less worried, they think that there's a good chance that you have negative feedbacks that impede the warming. And so the real question is, what is equilibrium climate sensitivity? Okay, that's the real issue. That it's not even really are things getting warmer right now? Okay, the issue is, what is equilibrium climate sensitivity? And theologically, I think you can make a strong case that it ought to be low, because our climate system was designed by an all-knowing creator who cares about us. You would think that he would put some stability into the system to do that, and we see some evidence of that. Okay, we see evidence that, for instance, we have more carbon dioxide. Guess what's happening around the edges of the deserts? You have more. The deserts are shrinking,
right?
Because the
deforestation is happening.
In carbon dioxide, yeah. So so it looks like God could very well have put some feedback mechanisms in there to protect us. Now the question is, let me put it another way: is there any real scientific evidence that climate sensitivity is high? Okay, I just gave you a theological argument, and what I'm going to argue is that the alarmists do not have a good scientific argument that climate sensitivity is high. Okay, there's three main arguments for that. Three main arguments that climate sensitivity is high. The first is what I call junk science. Okay, this is stuff that should have never been published in the first place. For instance, Michael Mann, his infamous hockey stick graph.
Yes.
There's a strong consensus now that that was really messed up and probably even fraudulent. Okay.
Whoa.
And so there's a lot of stuff that I would put into that category that, it looks like they juggled the numbers, or they were cheating, or just messed up. Okay. So that's the first argument. I don't really think you should put any weight in that. The second is coming from these climate models, the computer climate models. Now, the computer climate models are not sophisticated enough to where you can actually model all those feedbacks directly. So what they do is they sort of put these parameters in that they think are approximately correct, and they're kind of guessing. Now, what's interesting about the climate models is in the past, they have almost always over-predicted the amount of warming. Like, they would make predictions, and then in hindsight, we can look back and say, oh, wait, those predictions were too high. Okay, so the climate models are consistently too high. They're running hot. Okay, so I don't really, I don't put much stock in the climate model argument. Okay, the third argument is one that I've spent a lot of time on, and that is the Milankovitch Ice Age theory. Okay, and this is, the alarmists will tell you this. Okay, they will tell you basically, if you believe the Milankovitch Ice Age theory, you have to believe in that climate sensitivity is high. Okay, and it's not too hard to see why, because they think that within the last 2.6 million years, there have been 50 ice age cycles, 50 ice ages. Okay, so if you're flipping back and forth between ice ages and warm periods, what they call interglacials, and you've done it 50 times in the last 2.6 million years, you pretty much have to conclude that climate sensitivity is high.
Right.
And now the problem is Okay, they know the changes. Let me just kind of explain what the Milankovitch theory is, and I think most of your viewers have heard of it. They may not know it by name, but I think they
Yeah,
probably heard of it.
that's a unique name for sure.
Yeah, it's basically it's the idea that over hundreds of thousands and tens of thousands of years, the Earth's axis tilts, the tilt changes, the direction, the wobble changes, the shape of the Earth's orbit changes a little bit. And so that's supposed to change the way the sunlight is falling on the Earth. And it's thought that controls the timing of ice ages. Supposedly, there are times in the prehistoric past where you have more summer sunlight hitting the high northern latitudes. And so when that happens, the thinking is, well, the ice melts back. Okay, the ice can't get as big, and so you have a warm period. And there would be other times in the prehistoric past where there's less of that summer sunlight hitting the northern high latitudes. And so the ice sheets grow and you get an ice age. And that, in a nutshell, is their Milankovitch ice age theory. Now, the problem is that even the advocates for the theory recognize that the changes in sunlight by themselves are too small to really do anything. They've concluded that something has to amplify these small changes in sunlight to bring about major climate change. So they're basically arguing that climate sensitivity is high. Now, the question then becomes, well, what evidence do you have that the Milankovitch theory is true? Okay, because you're assuming that if it's true, climate sensitivity has to be high. Well, if your evidence for the Milankovitch theory is shaky, then that argument collapses.
Wow.
And what I found is that the argument is shaky. And the reason most secular scientists believe in this Milankovitch ice age theory is because of a paper that was published in 1976 in the journal Science called The Pacemaker of the Ice Ages. It's a very, very well-known paper. It's iconic. Okay, I mean, it is very, very important in secular thinking. Well, what these scientists did was they examined chemical wiggles in these two deep sea sediment cores that they got from the deep southern Indian Ocean. Okay, so what they did, they drill these sediment cores from the ocean floor, and they make these chemical measurements, and they made some other measurements too. And they think that those measurements they make are climate indicators. And so they think they're telling a story about climate change over hundreds of thousands of years. Okay, so what they did was, the question was, is the story consistent with this Milankovitch theory? Well, according to the Milankovitch theory, there should be these astronomical cycles of about 100,000, 41, and 23,000 years. Well, it turns out when they analyzed the data from these cores, they got cycles of about 100,000, 41,000, and 23,000 years. And they said, oh man, that's a great fit. That's a great fit to the Milankovitch theory. It must be true. But here's the thing. You can't, as a general rule, you cannot use radioisotope dating methods to date the deep sea sediments. Okay. In theory, you could maybe use radiocarbon dating for like some of the upper sediments. And there's a few other methods that could maybe go a little bit farther down. But remember, they believe that these deep sea cores go back multiple hundreds of thousands of years and even millions of years when they stick it all together. So they had time scale. So the question is, how did they date the cores?
Yeah, because radioactive carbon decay.
Okay, so here's what they did. They think there was, the seafloor sediments have magnetic minerals in them. Okay, and so when the magnetic field that records, those minerals record information about the direction of the magnetic field. Well, they thought that there was another sediment core thousands of miles away where they had what they thought was a magnetic reversal, where the Earth's magnetic field flipped, and it happened. It was at a depth of 12 meters. Now, like I said, you can't directly date the seafloor sediments, but based on their dating, their potassium argon dating of volcanic rocks on land, they'd already convinced themselves that reversal happened 700,000 years ago. And they also, now I never understood how they did this. I think it was circular reasoning, but they convinced themselves that the seafloor sediments at that other core were deposited at a very constant rate. So they said, oh, this is easy. If the top of the core has an age of 0 and 12 meters has an age of 700,000 years, then the age just goes up at a constant rate from the top to that depth. Okay. And so they said, well, we can just use simple fractions to assign ages to those sediments. Okay. So if you were at 6 meters, halfway down, they would have said that was 350,000 years old, right? The age would be half of 700,000 years. Okay. Then, this is where it gets kind of crazy. They think that these chemical wiggles, they think it's a global climate indicator. So they think theoretically you should have the same signal in different sediment cores, even if they're thousands of miles apart. So what they do is they wiggle match. They find prominent peaks, prominent troughs in the wiggles, and they assume those are the same age. So
they're literally going around the world, looking at these cores and going, oh, this one is up here, down here, up here. Match that to something way over here. Yeah. Oh, obviously that was laid down at the same time because I got the wiggles to match.
It's risky. That is risky even by their reckoning, because there are local things that could affect that signal. Okay, so it's kind of a dubious thing to begin with, but we'll just leave that aside for the time being. So what they did was they used that to set up a time scale for these two cores in the Indian Ocean. And they got their time scale. And when they turned the crank, they got cycle lengths that agreed with the Milankovitch theory. And so they said, oh man, this is great evidence for the Milankovitch theory. I mean, in fact, this paper is so important that in 2016, the journals Nature and Science both ran articles commemorating its 40th anniversary. That's how important this paper is to secular thinking.
Wow.
Okay, so now remember, where are we going with this? We're asking, is the evidence for the Milankovitch theory strong? Okay, because that's one of the main arguments for climate instability. Okay.
Yeah, let me before you hit that.
Sure.
So if you're joining us and for some reason you guys saw some people come in, we're saying, okay, what's the truth about global warming? He's setting up or climate change, setting it up. And there's multiple lines of evidence against, and he's saying, okay, those that are for, like for example, God's word, a young earth, you could use young earth arguments to say, we don't even have time for this kind of stuff that you're talking about, for the climate change that happens cyclical over hundreds and hundreds of, over 2 millions of years. But he's going, okay, number one, you got junk science, the hockey graph stick, throw that out as junk science, possibly even totally fabricated. You got the climate models, which have always been predictions that are too high. In other words, when we predict 10 years out, well, here we are 10 years later, they were wrong. And then this Milankovitch theory is the third one. And so that's why he's spending time on this one going, this is the one that they really hold on to pretty tightly.
Right. And if you go to like some of these websites where they debunk, those of us who think they're overreacting to this, they will tell you that's one of their main arguments for that. Wow. Why we ought to be worried about global warming, climate instability. All right. So here's what I did. I did some digging and I found out that today they no longer claim that magnetic reversal happened 700,000 years ago. Today, they say it happened 780,000 years ago. Okay. Now, of course, we don't buy those numbers. We think those reversals were triggered during the Genesis flood. Okay. But let's just use them for argument. Okay. We're going to use their numbers and we're going to go back and redo the calculations. And so that's what I did. And it turns out when you do that, it messes up the results.
Just that 80,000 years to go from 700 to 780. I mean, we think of it as that's so far back in time, an extra 80,000. Okay, they were off a little bit.
Great question. It turns out it does matter because the ages they assigned to those sediment cores only went up. Neither one of them was greater than 500,000 years. So that 80,000 year difference is enough. It
does make a big difference when you do your calculations out. Okay.
Yeah, when you do your calculations, it knocks it out of alignment. And so, if you use the same argument they made back in 1976, taking into account this new age, I mean, and by the way, you can go to Wikipedia. The age of this magnetic reversal is called the Brunhest-Maruyama magnetic reversal. It's named after these famous scientists. And
you're gonna have to spell that one for Marlissa to find a link and put that in there. Wow.
Okay. Yeah, it's BR UNHES.
Oh, she got it. Look at that.
Oh, you
She's
got
got to
it.
put
There
it
you
in the
go.
chat.
You can
Marlissa,
look it up.
that's why you're in charge and not me. You can spell. That's
And you
awesome.
can look it up on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia, which is no friend of the creationist movement, will tell you the age of that reversal is 780,000 years.
Wow.
So their proof, okay, their confirmation of the Milankovitch theory used a number they don't even accept as valid anymore.
Wow.
And so, and the beauty about this is we don't have to argue for a young Earth to show that their argument is invalid, because we're using their numbers. We're using their numbers, their methodology, and their assumptions, and we're showing that the results are off when you just take into account that change that they made.
So,
and, yeah.
How far out that extra 80,000 years? So this is the one thing that they've really got. The climate models haven't worked. The junk science has been exposed. The one thing they've got, and now you realize the one thing they have was off by 80,000 years. How far does that throw? When you did the calculations, how far does that throw out their numbers?
Okay, well, it depends. There were two cores. It actually helps the result for the first core. Okay. The second core, though, it really messes it up. There were three frequencies that they were predicting. There was one that corresponded to 100,000 years, one that corresponded to 41,000 years, another one that corresponded to 23,000 years. The 100,000 years is still okay, but the 41 and 23, they got knocked out. They got knocked out of alignment, and even worse, those two cores were too short to get statistically significant results. So to try to make a significant, a more strong argument that this was valid, they took some of the data from one of the cores and some of the data from the other core, and they stuck them together and made a longer data set. And when you do it, okay, it doesn't really pass. Well, first of all, let me rephrase that. You can't even do a test of statistical significance because the frequencies no longer line up with what they're expecting. I don't even know how you would do it because it's not lining up anymore. Now here's where it gets interesting, Eric. I think I came across evidence that I think some of these guys realized this, okay? Because what happened was they had changed the age of that magnetic reversal in around 1992. Okay, they were toying with, let me tell you the best part about this. You know why they changed the age of that magnetic reversal? Because they were trying to get other sediment cores to agree with the Milankovitch theory, and they were having trouble doing it. So instead of saying, oh, we can't get the Milankovitch, we can't fit all the data to the Milankovitch theory, they just arbitrarily changed the age of that reversal. They overruled the radioisotope dating methods, and they just arbitrarily changed it from they'd already bumped it up a little bit before that to 730,000 years. Then they just went 50,000 more and brought it up to 780,000 years. And it's hard. You kind of have to read between the lines. I have never, in all my reading, I've never ever seen them come out and candidly admit this. But I found some science articles where if you read between the lines, I think they realized they had a problem around 1996.
To learn more about how you can partner with us, visit us at creationtoday.org/partner.